The autumn that never ended. In the fall of 1967, Michigan's leaves seemed to fall especially beautifully. Everyone said so. Newspapers, postcards, tourist brochures. Red maple, yellow oak, damp asphalt carrying the cold breath of the Great Lakes. In places like this, it always feels as though nothing bad can happen. People study here, fall in love here, plan their lives here. That is precisely why killing begins here. That autumn, Michigan did not yet know it would acquire a name, one that would make people shudder decades later. Ann Arbor lived the life of a university town, loud, naive, confident in its own safety. The campus breathed freedom, long hair, denim jeans, anti-Vietnam War posters, the smell of coffee and cheap cigarettes. Girls laughed louder than their mothers ever allowed themselves to. Boys talked about the future without questioning whether they would have one. It was here, amid all that certainty, that something went wrong. The body was found in a strip of woods near an old road. Not right away. First, they found the bag. "Female," the patrol officer said, crouching. "Looks like a university student's." Detective Lieutenant Frank Miller wasn't looking at the bag. He was looking at the ground, at how the grass was pressed down, unnaturally neat, as if someone had tried not to leave traces. That was strange. Murders, if these were murders, were usually crude, rushed, full of mistakes. This scene was too calm. "Call it in," Miller said quietly. "Have them send the coroner." When the body was uncovered, it became clear. This was no accident. From that moment on, it stopped being just a case. She was young, very young, a student. It showed in everything, in her careful hands, in the thin ring she never took off. Miller looked at her and thought of his daughter, of how she had left for college too, with a bag too, equally certain the world was mostly safe. "Strangulation," the coroner said. "No signs of struggle." "As if she didn't resist?" Miller asked, "or trusted whoever was with her?" The words lodged in his mind. Trusted. At that very same moment, just a few miles away, John Norman Collins lay in his room listening to the radio. The vinyl crackled softly. He loved that sound, as if the world itself were admitting its imperfections. John lay on the bed, hands folded behind his head, staring at the ceiling. A crack ran across it like a map. He often imagined it was a road he would one day take, or one someone would follow to him. He was thinking about the girl. She was calm, he thought. Good girls are always calm. They don't scream. They don't ruin the moment. He didn't see himself as a monster. He rarely thought of himself as bad at all. What he felt instead was distance, as if he were merely an observer, as if everything happening was inevitable. John stood, walked to the mirror. Handsome, he knew it. People told him often, especially women. An open smile, attentive eyes, no threat. "It's fine," he told his reflection. "You're just living." Outside, someone laughed. Life went on. When the second girl disappeared, the police still didn't connect the cases. Students, young women, gone, the precinct chief said. Could be anything. Runaways, boyfriends, drugs. Miller stayed silent. He stared at the map pinned to the wall. Pushpins. Only 2 so far, but the distance between them was too logical. Too precise, he thought. He remembered the coroner's words. Trusted. "They get into a car," he said aloud, "voluntarily." "And how do you know that?" "Because there's no struggle, because it's near campus, because—" he paused, "because it's someone who looks safe." The room fell quiet. "You're talking about a serial offender?" someone finally asked. The word sounded odd. In 1967, it was barely used. "I'm talking about a man," he replied, "who figured out how this place works." John Collins knew how to be useful. "Need a ride?" he'd ask casually. "Looks like rain." He never insisted. That mattered. He waited until the decision was made for him. "People like to believe they choose," he thought. "I just create the conditions." In the car, he turned on music, talked about classes, about plans, about money troubles. He knew how to be normal, so well that sometimes he believed it himself. When they laughed, he felt warmth, real warmth, almost human. Then came the silence, and in that silence, he knew the moment had arrived. The third body was found outside the city. Now there was no doubt. Newspapers began to write cautiously but anxiously. Missing students. Police urge vigilance. Miller read the articles and felt anger rise. Too soft, too late. "He's among them," he told a colleague. "Walks the same streets, might study here, might work here." "And how do you plan to find him?" Miller looked out the window, at students hurrying past. "By mistake," he said. "People like this always make one, sooner or later." He didn't yet know how many mistakes there would be, or how much each one would cost.
Chapter 2. The Man Who Is Always Nearby. In November, Ann Arbor's weather changes abruptly, as if someone flips a switch. Yesterday you could walk without a coat. Today the wind off the lake cuts your face, and the sky hangs low and heavy, almost hostile. The city feels closed in, and so do the people. They walk faster, look around less, trust smiles less. But trust has inertia. It doesn't disappear all at once. And that is what he relied on. Lieutenant Frank Miller hated mornings, not because of exhaustion, but because of the thoughts that arrived before the coffee. The third body changed everything. Now he had no right to make a mistake and no clarity either, only the feeling of staring at a poorly developed photograph. The outline was there, but the face was blurred. He stood by the board where the map hung. 3 points now. The line between them drew itself, not straight, but logical. "He doesn't travel," Miller said without turning. "He lives here." "Half the city lives here," Sergeant Harper replied. "Students, professors, workers." "No," Miller shook his head. "He knows the terrain too well, knows where they won't look, where a body can lie and not be found immediately." He remembered the woods, the neatness. He continued, "This isn't rage, it's control." The word hung in the air. Control was the most frightening motive of all. John Collins sensed the change before the newspapers did. People grew cautious. Women declined rides more often, looked closer, sometimes too close. "Fine," he told himself. "That's normal. It even makes things more interesting." He sat in a bar near campus, drinking cheap beer and watching. Watching people pretend to be relaxed was his favorite pastime. "You're quiet today," said the girl beside him. She knew his name. Many did. "Thinking," he smiled. "About what?" He looked at her. At the way she waited. How fast everything changes. Yesterday you trust the world. Today you don't. She nodded as if he'd said something profound. People like it when their fears are voiced, John thought. It makes them feel in control. He offered her a ride. She refused. "No problem. There's always another." Miller started walking the campus. Unofficially, no badge, no forms, no "for the record." He sat in cafeterias, listened to conversations, watched faces. He wasn't looking for suspects, he was watching reactions. "Did you know the missing girls?" "No, but a friend of a friend." "They say he's good-looking." "Who?" "You know, the one doing it." That line struck hardest. "Good-looking?" Miller asked. "Well, yeah," the student shrugged. "Everyone says he didn't seem dangerous." Miller stepped outside and lit a cigarette after years of quitting. Dangerous men rarely look dangerous, he thought. They look convenient. The mistake happened in the evening. Not a big one, almost invisible. The kind John didn't even recognize at first. He gave a ride to a red-haired girl with a heavy bag and tired eyes. She hesitated a long time, but rain tipped the balance. "You're sure you live this way?" she asked when the car turned. "Of course," he replied too quickly. She looked at him. Just for a second. But it was enough. "Stop," she said. "I'm getting out." He stopped. She slammed the door and walked away without looking back. John sat there feeling irritation. Not anger, irritation. She ruined it, he thought. She broke the rhythm. He didn't notice she memorized the license plate. Didn't notice she would tell a friend an hour later. Didn't notice that fear sometimes works faster than confidence. The name surfaced 3 days later. Not as a suspect, as the guy who gives rides. Collins, Miller read from his notebook. John Norman. There are hundreds like that, but this one keeps coming up. Miller studied the photograph. Young, neat, an open smile. That smile. Too perfect, he thought. "Check him," Miller said. "No pressure, just look." "And if it's not him?" Miller paused. "Then we just talk to another good guy." John felt it immediately. Not a specific act, a tension. As if the air grew thicker, as if eyes lingered a second too long. He stood before the mirror again. "You're fine, you're always fine." This time the reflection didn't answer. That autumn, Michigan began to suspect, and he, for the first time, felt that control might not last forever.
Chapter 3. A Conversation Without Accusations. By December, fear had settled into Ann Arbor the way frost settles into the ground, quietly, invisibly, but deep enough to crack foundations. People still went to classes, still laughed in bars, still fell in love. But now every laugh came with a glance over the shoulder, and every car slowing near the curb felt like a question. The interview room at the station was small, deliberately so. Not cramped, just intimate enough to make silence noticeable. Frank Miller sat alone at the table, a paper cup of coffee cooling between his hands. He hadn't touched it. He was thinking instead about tone. Don't rush, don't accuse, don't corner. Men like this didn't respond to pressure. They responded to interest. The door opened. John Norman stepped inside, wearing a clean jacket, hair neatly combed, posture relaxed. He looked around with mild curiosity, not fear. "Lieutenant Miller?" he asked pleasantly. "They said you wanted to talk." Miller stood, offered his hand. "John, thanks for coming in." The handshake was firm, normal. That too was information. No hesitation, Miller noted. No tremor. They sat. "This isn't an arrest," Miller said immediately. "Just a conversation." "I figured," John smiled.
I've got nothing to hide." The words were spoken easily, too easily. John looked around the room while Miller spoke, not nervously, but with interest. He noticed the scuffed floor, the old clock ticking too loud, the faint smell of disinfectant. This is where people confess, John thought, or where they think they will. Miller asked about school, about work, about his car. John answered smoothly, even gladly. He liked talking about himself, liked the feeling of being the center of a narrative. "Some people mentioned you help out," Miller said casually, "giving rides." "Sure," John shrugged. "Campus town, everyone does it." "Some don't." John smiled again. "Guess I'm just friendly." Miller watched the smile, measured it. "A few girls felt uncomfortable," he said casually, "said you took a wrong turn." John's eyebrows rose, just slightly. "Funny thing, memory," he said. "People get scared, they rewrite details." There it was. Not denial, correction. Interesting, Miller thought. Silence stretched. John didn't rush to fill it. That was another mark against him, or for him. Miller hadn't decided yet. "You ever feel like the town's changed?" Miller asked suddenly. John blinked. "Changed how?" "Less trust, more fear." John leaned back in his chair. "That's what happens when people stop feeling in control," he said. "They look for someone to blame." Miller nodded slowly, as if agreeing. "And what do you think about that?" John met his eyes. "I think people are afraid of the idea that bad things don't need a reason." The answer was thoughtful, too thoughtful. "You've rehearsed this," Miller thought, "or you've thought about it far too much." When the interview ended, John stood easily. "Am I free to go?" "Of course." "If you need anything else," John said, "I'm around." That phrase stayed with Miller. "I'm around." John walked out of the station into the cold afternoon air. His breath fogged briefly, then disappeared. His hands were steady. Only when he reached his car did something tighten in his chest. Not fear, but irritation. He was watching me, John thought. Not listening, watching. He started the engine. That means I exist to him. The thought was strangely exhilarating. Miller didn't write a report right away. He sat at his desk long after sunset, staring at nothing. The interview replayed in fragments, the smile, the phrasing, the calm. "Too clean," he muttered. "What?" Harper asked from across the room. "Nothing." Miller finally opened a file and wrote one line. "Subject displays unusual emotional control." It wasn't evidence. It wasn't even suspicion. But it was a start. John's dreams changed after that. Not nightmares, dreams of order. He dreamed of roads without turns, of rooms without doors, of voices that stopped asking questions. In the dreams, everything followed a sequence, and the sequence never broke. He woke up calm. "They're behind me," he told himself, "which means I'm ahead." But something else had crept in, something new. Awareness. He noticed cars more, faces, reflections in windows. Not fear. Respect, he decided. Another girl disappeared 2 days before Christmas. The town went quiet in a way Miller had never heard before. Not panic, not hysteria. Resignation. "He didn't stop," Harper said softly. Miller stared at the phone on his desk. "No," he replied. He accelerated. He reached for Collins's file. "You don't stop after a conversation like that," he thought. "You prove something." That night, John drove longer than usual. Past familiar streets, past places he knew too well. The radio played softly, a love song, something hopeful. He turned it down. They think talking changes people, he thought. It doesn't. He parked, turned off the engine, and sat in the dark. For the first time, he felt the thin edge of something unfamiliar. Not guilt, not fear. Pressure. And pressure, he knew, always demanded release. That winter, the space between hunter and hunted grew dangerously small, and neither of them was willing to step away.
Chapter 4. The Cracks in Control. January arrived without ceremony. Snow dulled the edges of Ann Arbor, softened the streets, muted the colors, as if the city itself were trying to forget what it had learned. But forgetting was no longer an option. The search warrant came back thin. Too thin. Frank Miller stood in Collins's rented room while two impressionless officers moved quietly around him. Books on psychology, clean clothes, a guitar in the corner, nothing out of place, nothing loud, nothing useful. "He knows," Miller said quietly, "knows exactly what not to keep." Harper looked up from a drawer. "Or we're wrong." Miller didn't answer. He stepped closer to the desk, ran his fingers along the edge. A faint scratch. Recent. People don't scratch desks without a reason, he thought. They press, they lean, they wait. "Bag it," he said. It wasn't evidence, it was instinct. John Collins felt lighter after the search. Not relieved, energized. They had come into his space, touched his things, looked for him inside objects, and found nothing. They're clumsy, he thought. They don't understand the rules. He walked through the snow with his collar turned up, hands in pockets, nodding to people who nodded back. Normal, invisible, accepted. But that night, something betrayed him. He dreamed again, but this time the order broke. A road with too many turns, a voice asking the same question again and again, a door that would not open. He woke with his heart racing. Focus, he told himself. Control is repetition. The break came from an accident. A college janitor found something caught in the branches near a service road, a scrap of fabric, not dramatic, not obvious, just wrong. It didn't belong to the winter. Miller held it under the station lights. Blue, synthetic, torn. "Matches nothing we have," Harper said. "Yet." Miller thought of Collins' jacket, the one he wore too often, the one he always adjusted. Run it anyway. This time, instinct didn't feel like enough. Pressure changed John's habits. He drove at different hours, used different streets. He stopped offering rides for a while, told himself it was strategic, temporary. But the stillness gnawed at him. "They think they've slowed me," he thought. "They don't see what slowing does." He caught his reflection in a storefront window and didn't recognize the expression. Not anger. Hunger. The lab report arrived on a Tuesday morning. Not definitive, but close. The fabric matched fibers from Collins' car interior, not uniquely, not conclusively, enough to lean forward. "We can't arrest on this," Harper said. "I know," replied Miller, "but now we watch him breathe." They began surveillance. Unmarked cars, long hours, cold coffee. Miller watched Collins walk, talk, laugh, saw him sit alone for long stretches, staring at nothing. He's waiting, Miller realized, and so are we. John noticed the car on the third day. Gray, too clean, too patient. He changed direction. It followed. Not aggressively, confidently. A smile crept across his face. "So that's how we're playing now." That night, he didn't sleep. He paced, thought,
planned, not an act, but a statement. They want to see me move, he thought, then I'll show them control. Miller felt it before it happened, a tightening in the chest, a sense of acceleration. He's going to do something, he said, or he knows we're watching. Same thing. The phone rang before either of them could finish the thought. Another disappearance. Closer this time. Too close. Miller closed his eyes. That's not confidence. That's defiance. John drove fast through the night, snow streaking past the windshield like static. The radio crackled, then fell silent. He turned it off. This isn't about them, he told himself. This is about proving the pattern still holds. But something was wrong. His hands shook, just slightly. He tightened his grip. Control isn't calm, it's force. By the end of that winter, control was no longer silent. It had begun to fracture, loudly, visibly, and both men knew the next move would not be subtle.
Chapter 5. The moment the pattern breaks. February did not bring relief. It brought clarity, the kind that arrives too late and stays forever. Snow receded into dirty piles along the curbs. The city breathed again, cautiously, as if testing whether the danger had passed. It hadn't. The mistake wasn't dramatic. There was no chase, no gun, no confession whispered into a recorder. The mistake was time. John stayed somewhere too long. A gas station off a secondary road, fluorescent lights, a bored clerk, a receipt that printed with the wrong minute. He noticed it immediately. That clock's wrong, he thought. He didn't know whose clock it was that mattered. Frank Miller received the call just after midnight. "We've got a witness," Harper said. "Not much, but it's something." Frank stood, already reaching for his coat. "Something's enough." At the station, the clerk's statement sat on the desk like a fragile object. A car description, a face remembered imperfectly, a timestamp. Miller compared it to the map, then to the file, then to the quiet certainty that settled in his chest. "Bring him in," he said. This time, there would be no casual tone. John didn't resist. That was what surprised everyone. He walked into the station with the same relaxed posture as before, the same polite smile, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Am I being arrested now?" he asked. "Now," Miller said, "we're being honest." They sat across from each other again. Same room, same clock, different air. "You've been busy," Miller said. "People say a lot of things," John replied. "They do, but patterns say more." John tilted his head slightly. "Patterns can be misunderstood." Miller leaned forward. "Only if they're broken." Something flickered, just for a second.
the evidence came together the way these things always do, not in a single revelation, but in accumulation. Fibers, witnesses, timelines that no longer aligned the way John needed them to. Each piece tightened the room. John spoke less, listened more. They're closing the space, he thought. They're ruining the symmetry. For the first time, the inevitability he had always relied on felt external, not his. "Why do you think you were smarter than everyone else?" Miller asked quietly. John looked at the table. "I don't think that," he said. "I think most people don't look closely." "And you did?" "I did." "And what did you see?" John hesitated. That was the real fracture. "That no one notices what's right in front of them," he said finally, "until it's gone." Miller sat back. "We noticed you." John closed his eyes. The confession, when it came, was incomplete. They almost always are. John spoke about control, about silence, about order. He avoided names, faces, details that would anchor him to consequence. But he spoke enough. Enough for warrants. Enough for charges. Enough for the story to stop being a question. When the door closed behind him, Miller remained seated. His hands shook, not from fear, but from release. The town reacted the way towns always do. Relief first, then anger, then the slow, complicated grief that arrives when people realized safety was an illusion all along. Students walked the same paths again, differently now. Bars filled. Laughter returned, altered but present. Ann Arbor survived. That didn't mean it forgot. Miller visited the campus one last time before transferring. He stood where the paths crossed, where the lights came on at dusk, where trust had once been automatic. "We name monsters so we can believe they're rare," he thought. "But they're usually ordinary men who learn how to wait." He turned away. John Collins sat alone, staring at a wall that offered no reflections, no roads, no doors, just time. For the first time, the sequence was not his to control. The story ended not with understanding, but with containment. And sometimes, that is the only ending the world gets.